Wonderful. So my name is Erica, and I help Nomadic Matt run his community events arm, which is called the Nomadic Network. This is why you guys are all here today. We launched this back in 2019, and it was a way for us to bring travelers together so they could meet like-minded travelers, but also learn about resources that get them traveling cheaper, better, longer, and more. And so we launched in 22 different cities all around the country and the world. And we had about 40 events before the coronavirus shut us down, and we had to pivot into virtual events. And that actually, a beautiful thing came out of the fact that we had to pivot. And that is that we got to actually bring on speakers from all over the world to talk to people from all over the world. So all of you travel lovers, I can't see the chat right now, but I'm sure you're not all in New York or San Francisco like Caitlyn and I are. I'm sure you're calling in from wherever, and that is just a beautiful byproduct of this really weird year that we've had. So we're really excited for you to be on today. A few things to keep in mind. You can turn your camera on, though you will be muted. We already have over 100 people in this event today. I'm so excited. But definitely use that chat for connecting with people, sharing your relevant experiences, asking questions. I will ask that if you are asking a question that you type the word question in, because I'm going to go through the chat and pull those out as Caitlyn's speaking, and then I'll do a little Q&A at the end. I just wanted to remind you that all of our speakers, including Caitlyn, are doing this out of the kindness of their heart and their passion for sharing their knowledge with you. And for that, we are so grateful. And also we encourage you to follow Caitlyn and all of our speakers, because that's why we're bringing them to you. We're bringing them as resources. She's been there, done that. So it would be a great idea for you to connect with her on Instagram or her website or whatever, and just sharing her experience and her journey. That is why we brought her here today. Also, we're here to learn, satiate your wanderlust, and have fun. For replays, I just want to invite you to our Nomadic Matt Plus membership network. You can get there by the QR code there, or nomadicmat.com/NM plus. You can get all the past. We've put on over 200 presentations this year. So all the access to all the past events and any future ones. Also, we'd love to invite you to follow us on Instagram. That's the.nomadic.network. And so that is all I have. And I would just like to share a little bit of a personal thing about Caitlyn. So the way that I found Caitlyn was Caitlyn showed up to, she's been to many of our events, but she showed up to our event on book writing and basically marketing your book. And when Caitlyn shared about the book that she's writing and that she's publishing, she's in the process of right now, I fell in love with just the passion that she was speaking with. And so that was all through a TNN event. And I said, please, please, please come speak to our network. And here we are today. This is her second event. So we're very excited to have her here. She has a really interesting past, even though she's only 23 years old. So I invite you to be inspired and also get in action after she teaches us how to plan a trip around the world. So I'll mute myself, and Caitlyn, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I have thoroughly enjoyed being part of the Nomadic Network, and it's so fun getting to do these events. So thank you all so much for joining. I'm astounded at how many people are on this call. That's so fun. There's 113 of you. Wow. Okay. So I will get started and just share my screen so we can hop into the content that I've prepared to share. So, here we are with How to Plan a Round the World Trip by me. I'll do a quick little intro of myself. So this is me. I'm Caitlyn Lubas. My Instagram, I have a personal one that I kind of post like day to day, like where I'm going, what I'm doing. Because I am a full-time digital nomad at the moment. I quit my job last month and decided that I wanted to pursue traveling full-time and like writing and doing travel related things. That's what I'm doing at the moment. And you can also follow my author Instagram, which is You Are Where You Go with a dot between all those words. That is the name of my book that I wrote about my journey traveling to 70 countries and all 7 continents during college, all by the age of 22. And yeah, what I'll mostly be talking about today is how I planned this, what I like to call Expedition 7 and 7 last year. It was a big trip that I was going to hit all 7 continents in the span of 7 months. And it wasn't my first time visiting all 7 continents, except it was my first time visiting Antarctica. But I kind of thought that it would be a really awesome experience to see so many different places in like a very condensed time period, to kind of be able to synthesize all the experiences and kind of compare and contrast more so in like one specific trip rather than kind of like throughout the years. So that was kind of the inspiration for that. And yeah, I'm currently a traveler, content creator, startup founder, kind of working in the early stages of a company that will help people get hidden gem, kind of like word of mouth recommendations for their planning their trips. So I can talk more all of that later, but that's just a little bit about me. So I'll get into my personal round the world trip planning process for this Expedition 7 and 7 that I mentioned earlier. So kind of the first step that I took was really thinking about, what do I want to see? Obviously, there's over 190, almost 200 countries in the world, depending how you define a country, and you can't see all of them that easily, at least. So I kind of had to choose, like, where do I actually want to focus my time? What do I want to see? Kind of what's important to me. So the way that I went about doing that, I kind of obviously started with like, okay, if I want to see all 7 continents, what are the things on each continent that I kind of want to see the most, or where do I want to see the most? And for me, it was easy enough to start out kind of narrowing things down just a bit, because I felt like before I went on this trip, I had seen most of the places that I wanted to see that were kind of like major quote unquote tourist destinations. Like I had spent 1 semester living in Florence, Italy during school, so saw a lot of Europe, spent 1 semester living abroad and studying abroad in Singapore, so I'd seen a lot of Southeast Asia. So these were kind of the places I hadn't really touched yet and was super excited to get to. So the way that I went about my kind of like strategizing what route to take, I kind of decided that, yes, first, the big decision for me was like, I wanted to hit all 7 continents. That was important to me for this trip. And then I wanted to mostly focus on like adventure oriented travel. So for example, under number 3, I have an East African safari that I was planning out. And that entailed like camping for 7 weeks straight and traveling overland on a truck. And that's probably, I figured, not something I would want to do when I was maybe like a bit older or like retired. So I was like, why don't I do it while I'm young? Some other things on here that I definitely kind of strategically chose based on my age and my preference were like, I wanted to hike to Mount Everest Base Camp, figured might as well do that while I'm young before my knees give out or something. That was kind of the way I went about like choosing where to go, was like, what can I do that's kind of adventure oriented, something I want to do now while I'm young, rather than kind of putting it off till later. I think it definitely, when you're planning out where to go and kind of what route to take, it does come down a lot to just like personal preference first, of like, what types of places do you want to see? What types of activities do you want to be doing there? And then also, kind of like, are there any special kind of like holidays or events that you want to align with? Like I had also been told by a friend that, oh, if you go to Sri Lanka at this time of year, there's this great like pilgrimage event that happens that you could see or be part of. And I personally just also, like, my birthday's in the summer, so I wanted to be in Australia to be able to swim with a platypus on my birthday. So there's just obviously personal considerations that you can take into account, but this is just one example of how I was able to kind of think about, okay, if I take the whole world, kind of pick and choose the little bits that I want to squeeze into this long trip, what would I prioritize? And this is kind of what I came up with at first. So that's the first step, just kind of thinking about like, what's your route? What do you want to include in that route as a general, like, big idea of these are the things I want to see in the next however many months or years that you want to be traveling around the world. Then kind of getting more into the logistics of it. This is when I actually planned it out, kind of figured out, okay, what's the actual route? What is the order of countries now that I know like each of these clusters? So I'll kind of go through these each a bit, but I'll just talk first. Basically, I tried to outline what I did in each month, and then the little like emojis next to each country or next to each month kind of explain what modes of transportation I took, because I thought that was kind of interesting to note that some months it was a combination of like planes and boats and buses. Other months it was entirely buses or just like overland travel. And other months it would have been kind of entirely traveling by plane between different countries. So definitely, obviously, I think one thing to keep in mind is that overland travel is probably the cheapest. Traveling by plane is obviously more expensive in most cases. So that's something to keep in mind also, just like considering your own budget limitations. Lots of things to get into, but figured I would just share my personal experience with this huge trip that I did first. So I had started out in January, kind of flew from the US to Antarctica and did that by way of Argentina. So the way you get to Antarctica is you kind of fly down to Ushuaia, which is the southernmost city in the world in Argentina. You take a boat across the Drake Passage, which is known as basically the roughest seas in the world. Sometimes they get 40-foot waves and the boat can rock all crazy all over the place. I had been lucky and got a pretty mild voyage, even though I felt like it was really bad and I wanted to stay in bed all day. But anyway, did Antarctica for 10 days, saw penguins, whales, seals, all these amazing things. Went back to Ushuaia where I departed and was able to explore that region of Argentina a bit. Went back to Buenos Aires, up to Iguazu near the border of Brazil, kind of did like a couple different countries in one trip that I consider largely just Argentina. I basically did like one day over the border to Brazil, one day over the border to Uruguay, and like one day over the border to Chile. And although I don't think that I would like cross these countries off my list and say like I've seen them all, that is a nice thing to keep in mind when you're planning a big trip, especially let's say I was spending 2 full weeks in Argentina. I was able to then also see not just Argentina itself, but 3 other countries and at least get like a little taste of their culture, a little taste of maybe the different foods that are kind of unique to those places. So kind of just like hopping over the border for a day or two when you're in a large country that borders a lot of other countries like Argentina can be something fun to keep in mind. And then, so one other thing I wanted to point out in my route, I didn't do a strictly like round the world, never coming home type of trip for 7 months. And I know some people definitely do that. That's something you can do. And there are even like round the world specific tickets that I'll talk about later when you're trying to book those types of trips. But I had decided like for personal reasons and just like also for packing for different climates, like drastically different climates, it made the most sense for me to come home to the US, kind of like offload certain things, repack certain things, then head out again for certain months. So in this kind of route that I mapped out here, I tried to highlight whenever it says US, that's kind of when I returned home, was probably repacking, kind of like just pivoting and then heading out for a month or 2 or 3 at a time again. So yeah, then February was kind of the start of my overland safari that was supposed to be 7 weeks straight. I actually ended up getting to also explore Qatar unexpectedly, kind of because I just had booked a flight that stopped in Qatar for a day and figured to make the most of it and go see the city. I think that's one thing I tried to highlight in here as well. Basically, it's Qatar and Singapore are the countries that are bolded. Those were basically kind of just like layover countries that I was flying on like Qatar Air to get to from the US to Kenya. I was flying on Singapore Air to get from South Africa to Sri Lanka. And it's very easy with those types of airlines to just like ask them to, can I delay my layover instead of just like 6 hours? Can I make it like a day or two? Because they want you to be able to explore their country. So I think that's one thing fun to keep in mind when you're planning these big trips as well. And then, yeah, so I kind of was on this 7-week journey through Kenya, Tanzania, Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, South Africa, and Swaziland. That was going to be my big 7 weeks of safarying and overlanding through Africa. And that ended up kind of getting cut short because of COVID, but talk more about that later. I'll just go through the rest of the itinerary for now. Then, yeah, as I mentioned, I was flying from South Africa to Sri Lanka via Singapore and Singapore Airways, was then going to go from Sri Lanka to Nepal to do an Everspace camp trek, then was going to go back to the US for a bit because I was actually graduating in the year of 2020, or I was supposed to before kind of the pandemic happened. This had kind of been like my post-grad trip to myself since I graduated a semester early, had a lot of free time before potentially starting a full-time job. So I was scheduled to be home for a month in May to do like graduation activities. Then I would have been going to Europe for the whole month of June, kind of hopping around, visiting different friends. Most of this would have been overland travel. I had a lot of experience doing basically overnight buses, overnight trains, very cheap flights within Europe when I had studied abroad in Florence. So definitely knew that that was all very possible, very doable, especially on a budget, and then was going to fly from Turkey back to the US. I think one thing overarchingly that I tried to keep in mind was like, whenever I'm planning those big flights from like one continent to the other, usually looking to leave out of a relatively big, like relatively frequented country definitely helps you get cheaper flights. Like if I had ended my trip in Romania, there's probably less of a chance that I would have been able to get a cheap flight back all the way to the States. So that was kind of a strategic decision in my initial planning. And then, yeah, I could have, I guess, gone from Turkey all the way to Australia, but decided instead to come home and kind of change out clothing because Europe was going to be hot in June and Australia and New Zealand would have been quite cold in July since that's their winter. So that's a big brain dump of kind of my trip and what I was planning to do and kind of how I strategized some of it. I'm sure there's a couple of questions, so I could take a few now if any are super kind of like timely to this content.
Sure. Someone is asking, did you book the cruise for Antarctica ahead of time, or did you just pick one when you were in Ushuaia?
Yeah, that's a big decision to make. I think I did a bunch of research beforehand. So I knew basically in my freshman year of college, when I was 18, I kind of had decided that before I graduated, or like by the time I graduated, I wanted to visit all 7 continents. And then I started looking into how to get to Antarctica and realized like, wow, people start planning this like 2 to 3 years in advance sometimes. So I knew that I needed to book it early. And when I kind of like had my dates in line, I did book my cruise to Antarctica about a year in advance. And even then, it was like we were booking some of the last spots on the cruise. Like there were like no more kayaking excursions available, like as an optional. So people really do start planning an Antarctica trip about a year or two in advance, I would say. But if you do try to go in kind of like the shoulder season of things, like basically you can only get to Antarctica, like it's only really accessible from I think around December through March, because that's when it's like summer in the southern hemisphere. There's a little bit less ice in the oceans down there and you can actually like reach the continent. So if you try to go in like I think either late November or even like March, which is like the very tail end of the season, I've heard from other people that if you just show up to Ushuaia and kind of like go to the Antarctic cruise tour providers and say like, hey, do you have any extra spots? Like, obviously, wouldn't you rather sell it for like a lower amount than like sail with no one in that empty room? Then you might be able to get a huge deal. Like I've heard of like discounts of probably up to like 60 to 70% off of like a very large ticket item. Like my cruise was around $8,000 per person. It's just not an easy place to get to, and there's a lot of demand and not so much supply. So it's definitely something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, and I will also share another question, which was basically, did you go solo to all these places, or did you book some group tours as you were going?
Yeah, really good question. That was an interesting thing because originally I was like, I'm just going to do this. I'm not going to wait around for anyone else. I'll just do it by myself. But then, kind of, once I announced this trip to my friends and like people were hearing about what I was doing, I ended up having people just like kind of just end up piling on. So I didn't actually do any of it by myself. Ironically, even though I ended up originally planning to do it that way, I went to Antarctica with my dad, and then I had been telling one of my friends that I was going to do this solo backpacking trip through Argentina and Patagonia. And then she was like, oh, another friend of mine is actually going to Argentina around the same time. You've never met, but you should just go together. So we actually did end up planning it kind of separately, just through like Google Docs. Then we met for the first time in our hostel in Buenos Aires and we did the trip together. And then for my big safari in Africa, that was a group tour. I was not planning on traveling in Africa by myself, just considering it's kind of like a less backpacker tourist developed type of area. So going with a group tour with a local guide definitely felt like it was the smart choice for me. And in case I was going totally alone, I would have been able to like make fast friends. But I did end up having like a buddy from one of my study abroad programs. She came on all of the African safari with me, and she was also going to come to Singapore, Sri Lanka, and Nepal. And then I would have been visiting friends in a bunch of European countries as well as Australia. So I wouldn't have actually been alone if I actually did get to do those despite COVID. But yeah.
And then one other question, were you using a round the world trip ticket or were you just booking all separate legs?
I looked into around the world trip tickets, and basically for most of them that the airlines offer, there's kind of like two main requirements is that you have to start and end your trip in the same destination, and you have to only be flying like west to east around the world or east to west around the whole world. So for the order that I wanted to do things in, and in what I kind of discovered was like the best season to be in each continent, like obviously Antarctica had to be for the winter, and like Africa ideally was going to be in February, March, so it would be like baby animal season out in the savannah, and like various other things. Like I wanted my birthday for Australia in July. I think the things that I was planning to do just didn't perfectly make sense with around the world tickets, so I didn't end up doing that, and I thought it would be a really daunting process to have to pack for one bag for like a 7-month trip. So I ended up doing like, I came home 3 times or I would have come home 3 times in the span of this 7-month trip. But I do know people who have done round the world trips for like 5 to 6 months, and you can make it work.
Awesome. You can continue.
Awesome. I'll get some more questions at the end for sure. So yeah, basically in summary, I ended up hitting, or I would have ended up hitting 7 continents, 28 countries in this itinerary, and that would have been over the span of about 175 days. So if kind of doing the math, averaging it out, it would have been about a week in each country, which I think was pretty reasonable to me because I wanted to spend a decent enough time in each place to kind of get to know it, get to experience it. But then again, there are also definitely places that are just like small countries that you don't need much more than a few days in to see like the main things. So it's always up to you when you're planning a worldwide trip, kind of how long do you have to travel? What is your budget to last that travel? This ended up just being kind of like the stats for my specific trip that I was planning. And then also wanted to talk about like, how do you go about announcing your trip to the world? And like, maybe you've planned all this out yourself, but how do you integrate that into your life and your social life? One of the big things for me was like, I made a post on my Facebook, just like this, where I kind of told everyone like, hey, I'm going to be traveling for the next 7 months. This is kind of my rough outline of my plan. Wanted to let people know, especially as well, that like, I probably want to have access to my phone number because I'll be switching SIM cards in all these different countries. So reach me on some sort of digital platform. And also I thought it was really important to outline like where I was going, not only so people kind of have an idea of the trip and kind of can follow along and be excited, but I happen to have a bunch of friends around the world who might also be visiting a place at a certain time or might be like living in that place. So wanted to kind of put it out there of like, if you happen to be traveling as well, feel free to meet up or feel free to reach out with any recommendations if you kind of have anything to say about this route. So I think like integrating your personal trip planning process into your social life and like involving your friends and family is like a really fun part of a round the world trip as well, because it's definitely not something that people do all the time. It's definitely I got so many questions and so many people being like, wow, can't wait to follow the journey, really want to see all your photos. So just definitely I think making a point to like post more about it because you're going on this amazing kind of once in a lifetime around the world trip is definitely something to keep in mind. And then also wanted to just give you guys some like screenshots and like sneak peek of like, how did I actually like logistically go about like planning this? So this is one of my like first documents I looked up in my Google Drive of like when I was mapping out the exact dates and the amounts and like where to exactly go, what were the things to see. I think one of the ways I was able to keep it all organized since it was a 7-month trip was just having a very detailed like day by day, like what am I going to do type of itinerary in each place. This is like one of the preliminary things that I did. Also, if you notice in the middle under the Asia section, I tried to map out like what are the holidays in Sri Lanka and maybe like which ones should I keep in mind as I'm going to different parts of the island, like what could be cool to see on different things. I had also been considering like maybe doing a work away type of thing which is where you can work on a farm in exchange for free housing, because definitely all these things started adding up and I was definitely trying to strategize some ways that I could save some cash in certain parts of the trip. And then these next screenshots, if it will load, these were basically like some more of the detailed planning I did. Like I was on the left here was trying to plan out like day by day, what are things I should do in whoops, kind of skipping all over the place. On the left here is like things I wanted to plan out day by day in Sri Lanka. I also kind of had this large document of like all of my flight confirmations, was able to save that whole document offline, found that really, really helpful. This is another, on the next slide, an example of like all the things in one document, like this is the flight, this is the time, this is my check-in time for this is who's picking me up at this airport. I think like one of the things I learned in planning this process is if you're planning a 7-month trip and you have like dozens of flights, dozens of things to coordinate, having it all in a document, having it handy, especially offline. Like that's one of the reasons I like using Google Maps, or sorry, Google Docs, is you can save it offline and access it even if your phone is on airplane mode. Was able to pull this up, scroll down to whatever date I was at, and just have all my stuff in one place. Thought that was super helpful. And then down here in the right corner, I had also kind of like laid this out for myself of like, these are the countries that need a visa, kind of did all that research in advance, mapped out the visa prices, maybe if there was a link to apply early or just any specific instructions, would have put it there in that column. I think just overarchingly wanted to give you guys some examples of like how I was able to stay super organized in this planning process. I can keep going for now, unless anyone has like any major questions related to like trip planning and maybe being organized. Let me look through the chat. So I see someone is asking, what is the visa process like for most places, not a US citizen, so want to learn more about that? Definitely a super valid question. I never knew off the top of my head before traveling and doing this big trip, kind of what was the visa process or like, what is it like to get a visa? But I had I gained a lot of experience applying for and dealing with visas when I studied abroad in Singapore and was kind of visiting all over Southeast Asia, because I would say about like half the countries I ended up visiting, like Vietnam and Cambodia and Sri Lanka, they all needed a visa, and most of them needed to be applied for in advance. So when I was mapping out like, okay, these are all the places I want to go, kind of would also just do a quick Google search, like visa for US citizen to Sri Lanka or visa for US citizen to blank. And if you're not a US citizen, obviously just like sub in your country. And not sure how it works for every single country, but at least for the US, the government provides a website where they kind of list out every country that you could possibly visit. They list out the US's like travel recommendation of like whether they recommend travel there or not. And they also list out the specific process and link out to the websites you would need to go to apply for a visa to that country. So long story short, quick Google search will probably solve most of your issues and questions for visa processes. Some of them can be quite long. Some of them you might need someone to like sponsor you and like write a letter for you to come to that country. Like that was my experience when I went to China on a separate trip. Visas can be tough. So I'm sure you could do a whole entire presentation on visas, but wanted to touch on that quickly. But then, any other questions related to like planning this process? Happy to answer.
Yes, we have a question on budgeting and overall budget. How do you decide that? And yeah, how do you just work that out as you were planning?
Yeah, I think for me, since I knew I wanted to include Antarctica in this trip, basically like 3 or 4 years in advance, I had specifically like made a section of my savings for like 3 years straight of like every couple months, like I'm putting a couple $100 or a couple $1,000 at the end of each year, like away towards this Antarctica trip, because I knew I wanted to do it. And I knew like in advance that it was going to be quite expensive, kind of between the cruise itself and flying to Ushuaia, which is very far from New York City where I'm from, and even paying for trip insurance, which is like $1,000 for Antarctica. I knew it was going to be pricey. So I think the first tip about budgeting would just be like, if you can start planning in advance, like if you know you're going to like quit your job or like do a big trip in like a year or 2 or even 3, budget early and like set aside those savings little by little. It'll be less painful than kind of like telling yourself, all right, I'm going to start traveling next month. I got to live like not spending any money to just save up for it. I think another thing about budgeting that I tried to keep in mind was like, I wanted to do things that were close enough to each other, like doing things like overlanding, to not spend a lot of money on flights. Cause I definitely think that flights end up being the most expensive whenever you're planning a big trip. It's kind of just like the biggest big ticket item that is like a non-negotiable, because you can always find pretty cheap housing, or even try couch surfing or doing these things like Workaway where you could get housing for free. But a flight is like, unless you happen to be like the son of a pilot or something, you're not really going to get on that standby list and you're not going to get a free flight. So I think that those are some of the things I kept in mind mind when I was budgeting, and also just you are always flexible as well. Like you could spend 20 to 30 to $50 a day on food, or you could spend like $5 if you choose to cook at your hostel. So I think budgeting definitely is like a very personal decision of just like, is eating food when you're traveling important to you, of like trying different cultures and trying special things you can only eat there? Or are you there to just like see things and you want to eat like rice and beans every night and just save money on food? That's like a personal decision, I would say, on the budgeting front.
I think that people are curious about like what the actual budget was for the whole trip. Like you can give a range.
Yeah. So one thing that I had basically when I was planning this trip, I had graduated early. So I was basically not paying for a whole semester of school and housing in New York. So basically the money I would have been spending on that, I kind of like reallocated towards this trip. So in total, it probably would have, I didn't actually go on the whole trip, obviously, because COVID happened in March of last year, and this is supposed to take place from January to July. So I think I was budgeting myself and trying to keep the whole thing to like $20,000, which I think I would have ended up being around in that range. Mostly because I would have been able to stay with a lot of friends when I was visiting people in Europe and Australia, and that obviously saves on housing costs. But I think, yeah, in total, if I had actually gone on the trip, I think it probably would have been anywhere between like $20,000 to $25,000 for 7 months of traveling and like paying for flights and lodging. Basically, I tried to compare it to what would I have been spending if I just stayed in New York, and tried to keep it in that same amount. So basically, I don't think I was like spending money. I was just like living my life in a different part of the world.
That's it for now.
Cool. Awesome. So then I'll just get into some general tips about like how to plan your around the world trip if you are thinking about doing one, kind of just some mindsets and things to keep as kind of like guiding lights as you're kind of mapping it out. Because obviously every around the world trip is going to look very different, but there's definitely a few key considerations. I would say these are the things that I tried to keep in mind when I was planning this trip. So first one hugely was weather. I think obviously, as I mentioned, Antarctica is only able to be accessed certain months of the year, or it's like super ideal to go to certain countries in the southern hemisphere in the northern hemisphere's winter because the weather's better and you can escape the bad weather in the northern hemisphere. So definitely like just keeping top of mind of like what season is it in that country at the time that I'm trying to go? Is it maybe like in line with a certain type of season for like the animals there? Like I strategically tried to pick a time to go on my African overland safari during a time when like around like February, March is when all the baby animals are being born. So I was able to see a lot of animals just and like babies and their moms and dads like out on the plains, which is really cool. Tried to time it to see the Great Migration between Kenya and Tanzania, but ended up like basically just missing it by like a week. But that's something that you can definitely keep in mind of like when are the key things going to happen for the places I want to go, or when are things even accessible, like I mentioned for Antarctica, or even like if you want to do a Mount Everest base camp trip, that's really only possible. I think the range is like April to May, and then like September to October, just because of the ice and the snow and the conditions. So weather's a big one, I would say, because you don't want to go to a place when it's like their rainy season. You probably won't be able to do much. If you can avoid it, definitely try to. Another key thing to consider is like, are you going at kind of an off peak or a peak time? Like I would say if you're ever trying to go to Europe in the summer, you should just expect tons of crowds and tons of overpriced things and things being booked, because most Americans frequent going to Europe in the summer. That's just one thing to keep in mind. Obviously, there's different kind of like peak times for different parts of the year. You can do some research online to kind of figure out what that is and what makes the most sense for you. I think if someone's not on mute, if you could mute yourself. And then I thought also about like clustering, kind of as I mentioned, wanted to see as many things in a close range as possible to do as much overland traveling as possible. So knew I wanted to do like all the things I wanted to see in Europe around the same time, all the things in Southeast Africa around the same time, to be able to do those kind of like as a bulk thing. Did the same with like Argentina and the surrounding countries. Visas, as I mentioned before, definitely consider like which countries need visas, which countries you need to apply for in advance. Like some of them you can't apply for a visa more than like, let's say 3 months before you're going to get there. But if you're going to be in the middle of a 7-month trip and you need to apply for like your last country in the middle of the 7-month trip, but you need to go to a consulate, maybe then that is a reason that you should like make a stop home in your home country, do that visa process, head out again, maybe repack. That's definitely visas can get definitely tough. I was kind of lucky on this trip. It didn't have too many issues with visas, and the ones I think like Nepal required a visa that was applied for like a month in advance, but I could do it just online, not in person. So definitely a lot to dive into there. Maybe that would be another good topic for a future Nomadic Network event, just dealing with visas. But also, things to consider around the world flights. I think someone asked about this earlier. I mentioned it earlier. There are specific like tickets you can book. I know like I tend to use like the Star Alliance types of airlines, and you can basically book a like one ticket that goes from like your home country to somewhere else, to somewhere else, to somewhere else, to somewhere else, and then back to your home country, all on one round the world ticket. And they usually have quite a big discount since you're staying with like the same airline alliance the whole time. Like generally the rules are that it has to go in one direction. Like you can't go like forward and backwards, because then it's obviously not quite around the world. You're just kind of going all over the place. And it has to start and end in the same place. So obviously I mentioned didn't work for me, but could work very well for you depending on your route. And then going home to repack. I think this is an important thing for me. Like I knew that I just would not be able to take the luggage that was applicable for like hiking in Patagonia and going to Antarctica, also to Africa. It just would have been a bunch of clothing and space in my suitcase that would have been wasted. So I made the trip to go home and kind of repack. And these are two pictures I tried to find. The one on the left is actually, that is the only baggage I took at all on my trip to Antarctica and for 2 weeks in Argentina. So like 3 weeks at once. I only used that small travel backpack that was like a carry-on item, and then like that small little bag for just like personal item. The backpack is made by Nomadic, and Nomatic. It's a really, really good travel backpack. Would definitely recommend it. And then more recently this year, this is also how I try to travel in general, like usually just with one big backpack as a carry-on item and like some smaller tote bags and stuff that I can shove under the plane seat. Definitely packing light is something that I would recommend. One of my biggest packing tips as well is like rolling all your clothing and shoving it into all the corners of a small suitcase. You'd be amazed how heavy these suitcases are. Like you can pack so much weight into a small condensed space if you roll all your clothing. It's just like tight. Or even using like vacuum bags. I've used those before where you can like squeeze all the air out and it like compresses a big sweater or a big like puffy jacket into like a little thing. Those are some good packing tips as well, I would say. And then also to just touch upon like mental preparation for a trip. I think like that's something that is often overlooked. Like, how do you even like mentally prepare to leave your home for 7 months, to be away from people that you know for 7 months or however long you're going to go? Some of the things that I thought were really important, like I knew keeping in touch with people was going to be really essential for me. Like one thing I was not willing to flex on my budget was I'm going to buy the local SIM cards. I'm going to pay for data. I want to keep in touch with people. I want to be sharing my experience. So that's one thing to factor in. Knew that I would also want to be kind of proactively like documenting my thoughts as I was traveling, and knew that one of the best ways to do that and kind of like process the things that were going on around me would be journaling. So on some trips, I've brought a physical journal where I kind of jot down notes in between things, like if I'm on a bus or if I'm like in transit or even just at the end of every day, just kind of like jotting down quick bullet points or just your overall thoughts, observations, how you felt, things that you feel like you would forget and are not captured in your photographs are great things to keep in a journal. And I found that as well, it kind of like pulls you out of like, just like, go, what are we doing next? What are we doing next? To kind of actually reflect at the end of every day, every week, to say like, what were the things that stood out? What did I actually learn about each place? What are the facts that are maybe like swimming around my head right now, but I'm not going to remember a year or two from now? Let me write them down. And honestly, journaling was like a huge reason why I was able to even write a book retroactively about my experiences, because otherwise I would not have been able to remember in detail all the things that we did day to day. So definitely would recommend journaling. I think it's really healthy and really honestly just valuable for yourself to have on a big trip. And then breather days. I think this is something I've learned over the years. I used to, when I first studied abroad, just be like, if I have 7 days, I'm going to travel and do things for all of those 7 days, or like however many days are in your kind of trip schedule. Have a few hours or even a few days on the tail end or beginning, like before you switch between countries on a around the world trip, to just be like, in case we don't actually get to all the things we listed out, like what would we want to kind of like have a flex day, or like if something goes wrong, like, I don't know, if your truck breaks down or something, which happened to me in Africa, like, do you have that flexibility to have some free days between the different things that you might have had like bookings for or tickets for. I think that's also important to keep in mind, just to like not mentally overwhelm yourself when you're planning a huge kind of 7 month, year long, however long type of trip. So you can take a few questions if there's anything related to anything that I've just said.
Sure. Erin was asking, do you find that you over planned?
I think I tried not to plan everything out day to day too much at all. Like, I think I tried to plan where I would be so I could book hostels. Like, I think some people that I know who travel quite a lot, they like just showing up to a country and figuring out on that day, like, where am I going to sleep? To me, that's very stressful. And like thinking about like showing up to multiple hostels and them all being full, like I would just never personally want to be in that situation. So I would say like the minimum planning for me would be like, flights are booked, hostels are booked, anything that's going to sell out in terms of activities, those are booked. And I kind of like will make a list of myself of like things I could potentially see, things I could potentially eat, things I could potentially do, but don't necessarily do like hour by hour or anything like that. I think that is definitely over planning, and you're just kind of setting yourself up for failure or like disappointment, because you're probably not going to have everything go 100% according to plan.
That's a great idea. All the things that are going to sell out, book those.
Yeah.
And then Natalie was asking, what are some bumps you faced while traveling that you weren't expecting, and any tips we can learn from?
Yeah, definitely a lot of bumps. I think as much preparation and research as you do, you can never be 100% prepared for a trip, or you might just like not expect certain things. Like I know, for example, like a huge thing that comes to mind when you mentioned like bumps in the road or like things that went wrong. I was traveling with a girl in Argentina, my friend, she's vegan, and we didn't really like think about it in advance that like Argentina is a very like meat heavy, cheese heavy, just like not super vegan friendly country. And especially in some of the parts that are like not metropolitan at all, where we were like hiking in Patagonia, there was just nothing for her to eat. Like all the sandwiches were just like meat, and nothing with just vegetables, nothing with just hummus or anything with protein. So there were a few days where she just like went into like a Whole Foods type of store and just bought it like a sack of nuts, and that's like all she ate for the entire day. So I think if you have any dietary considerations, that's definitely something that can be a huge bump in the road. I would try to do some research beforehand, or even like somehow try to get to talk to someone who is that same like dietary restriction or identity as you. Like, let's say if you're gay or Black and there's like certain things to consider when you go to certain places. I think all of that can be like huge bumps in the road that you don't necessarily anticipate. And I think, me personally, one thing that I faced that was a huge bump was just like not packing the right things. I think you can try to research as much as possible, but then I don't know, it'll always be like cold in Kenya and you like didn't expect it to be, and you're just like shivering in your sleeping bag. You got to go out and buy another one. Like things like that happen. Definitely, like if you are on a super tight budget and you're trying to like budget out every single day, give some wiggle room in that budget for just like emergency purchases, because it will happen. And I would say just, yeah, overall, the best advice I could give to avoid any like bumps in the road is like, do as much research as you can, just be knowledgeable of like what could go wrong or like what you should look out for. And then also having that wiggle room in your budget to like account for like, your truck broke down, this must happen, it must get fixed. Like you forgot this thing and it's essential. Like you didn't pack enough of this thing, you got to go buy it. Definitely not putting too many constraints on yourself helps in a stressful situation to kind of be able to fix whatever went wrong.
Great. I can save the rest until the end.
Awesome. Yeah, we're pretty much done. This is just the last slide of like, if you want to get a download of these slides. And also if you're interested in kind of reading my book, You Are Where You Go, which is a collection of stories from my travels to 70 countries and all 7 continents by the age of 22. I kind of have each chapter as an individual story that talks about like a place that I went, what I learned there, what I realized there. It's all about kind of like the intersection of travel and personal development, and how everywhere you go becomes a part of you. Every place you go kind of teaches you not only about the world, but really about yourself. I think one of the big missions I have as like a content creator and a travel writer is to inspire people to see travel as a way to learn and grow, not just necessarily a place or a way to see different places and just like take pictures. So you can type into your browser bit.ly/ this should be capital RTW for around the world planning. That'll give you a link to the slides. And if you want to read more about my book, you can also check it out at youarewhereyougo.com. It is coming out in November and it is available for pre-sale right now. So if you do put your email on this little bit.ly, I will also send you a link to pre-order it and can give you a little discount code specific to the Nomadic Network, which definitely would love to get travel lovers like you guys reading my book. So yeah, I'm open to any other questions now and can definitely stick around for however long after this session is supposed to end, because I love talking about this and know there's probably a lot of questions.
Well, first of all, I want to congratulate you and on your whole journey on this presentation. That was fabulous, but also like on writing a book and being 23 years old and really just getting your message out into the world. I think it's really important and I think it's really inspiring. And I know, our network is not just 23-year-olds. There are people that are looking at you like, wow, I can't believe how accomplished you are. And I wish I was there. Or I did that also when I was 23. And like, how fun would it have been if I wrote a book about my journey? So, and hopefully there's a lot of people out there looking at their, teens saying like, look at what you can do with your last semester of college if you, study harder and faster and can graduate a semester early. And then you could just like travel for 6 months for the money you would have spent. So I think that this was a really important and inspiring conversation. But we also obviously have tons of questions. And I think I want to start with Eric's from a while back, which is just, how did you decide to write a book? He said he was on the road for years, but never thought his path was that interesting. So how did you actually come about writing a book?
Yeah, I've always liked writing. Initially, when I went abroad for my first semester, when I was a sophomore in my second year of university, I had done my semester abroad in Florence and was like, I'm living my dream life. I'm getting to study abroad and visit different countries in Europe every single weekend. I'm going to blog about it. Kind of figured out that short form, like informative, like this is what you should see here and this is what you should eat here was like not very fulfilling to me. It's not the type of writing that I liked creating. Like obviously that's very helpful and like I read travel blogs like that myself when I'm planning out a trip, but more of the writing that I was interested in is like inspirational type of travel writing, like stuff that will make people want to go to a country that they maybe have never heard of before because they hear about an amazing experience or like a life-changing perspective that someone was able to like learn there. And I've had a lot of interesting, very unique experiences in my own life that I've like told these travel stories over and over and over again. Like a lot of people in my personal life who like know that I got into a motorbike accident in Vietnam and had to get stitches. Like I've told this story probably close to 100 times and just like know it front to back. So it was like, why don't I write it down? So I can tell people, like, even if I can't have a conversation with them, I can tell them what I learned. I can tell them how that experience was, how they can learn from it themselves. And I think I just got to a point where I realized there were so many different stories in my life that I tell over and over again, and that I think they're really valuable lessons that I've been able to earn through hardships in travel. And if I'm able to write those stories down, kind of give them more context and like share them with the world, then even if you're not able to travel, you can basically get the experience, get the perspectives, get the learnings from traveling from the comfort of your bedroom, basically by just reading a book like this.
Armchair traveling. Wonderful. Okay, so we have some other questions that are going to be sort of all over the place.
Sure.
Kim was asking, how far into the trip did you make it before having to stop because of COVID? And I believe it was Carla that was asking, are you going to finish the trip at some point?
Both really good questions. Yeah. So I was in Zimbabwe at Victoria Falls when basically we were hearing rumors that the countries around us and Zimbabwe itself was going to close the borders sometime soon. This was around mid-March. I want to say like March 13th or so of last year, which is kind of when like Italy was really, really bad and the US was getting really, really bad. And like everyone, it was really funny at the time because like we were like me and the group tour that I was on, we were all just in the middle of Africa and like no one had even like spoken a word. No one had uttered the words coronavirus because it just like wasn't there yet. So some of the people on my tour were saying like, why would I go home? Why would I go back to Europe? Or why would I go back to the US? I'm just putting myself in more danger. But then we all kind of came around to the realization that like, probably going to come here eventually. And if it does get here and the borders are closed, not only is there like, we wouldn't have healthcare in these countries, we wouldn't probably have like the same, anywhere remotely the same like hospital infrastructure as we would back home. And you'd probably have to pay for somewhere to be like quarantined for a super long time. I think like when those realizations came about, everyone was just like, okay, no one's going to try to stick it out. We don't know how long this is going to last. Like initially me and my friend, we were actually saying like, oh, we should just keep going. We'll just like go to Sri Lanka, wait it out a month or two. Like imagine I had stayed in Sri Lanka for the duration of the pandemic. Like that would have been insane. So I ended up flying home on like an emergency flight from Zimbabwe to the US, because basically the president of South Africa, I think it was like March 14th, I want to say, announced that he was closing the border to South Africa, and everything in Southern Africa kind of like follows suit what South Africa does. So we basically had like 3 days to get home before the borders were closing, had to pay literally $3,000 one way for a flight to go home. But I had travel insurance, which was honestly something I never, ever had bought before, but I had to, like, I was required to buy travel insurance for the overland safari I was doing, since we were kind of like camping out every night, could have potentially been attacked by a hyena or something. They wanted us to have travel insurance. And since I did, I was able to not only get refunded for the $3,000 ticket home, but also all of the subsequent flights and tours that I didn't get to go on. So I got a check in the mail in like June of 2020 for $9,000, which was like a huge perk, obviously. So I can't advocate for travel insurance enough. I use Travel Guard, and they were really seamless. The process went really well. I know there's an event, I think tomorrow, with the Nomadic Network talking about all about travel insurance. So definitely recommend showing up.
Yeah, that's insane. And probably, I don't know if you did the math, but how much did you actually pay for the travel insurance? So
The
much.
travel insurance was only $500 and I got back $9,000. So it was 1,000% worth it. Like, cannot say it enough. But then also, yeah, I know the second question you asked was, would I ever like go back and I guess like finish the trip? Yes, that's basically my first thing on my list of priorities. As soon as the countries I was intending to are like open to travel, and like hopefully ideally when their populations are like vaccinated, I want to go back and do not only Sri Lanka and Mount Everest, but like do all the things in Europe, do all the things in Australia that I was intending to do.
And would you start all over again?
I probably wouldn't do the whole like 7 and 7 thing again, unless it was like, I think I want to go back to Antarctica a few years from now. Definitely need a lot more time to save up for it again, because it is so expensive. And I think when I go back to Antarctica, I do want to do a longer version of the trips that they do. Like I know I went to Antarctica with a company called Ocean Wide Expeditions, and would also highly recommend them. But they have a version of the trip where not only going to the Antarctic Peninsula, but they stop on this island kind of in the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean called South Georgia. And it is an island. The way that the tour guides described it, they were saying like, there are so many penguins on this island that sometimes they can't even dock the boats because there's just so many penguins on shore. There's not even a spot to put the boat. And that sounds like a dream to me. Like I love penguins. So that is definitely on my bucket list, to get back to Antarctica / South Georgia. And that trip, like as a whole, I think it's like 20 days of travel and it's like $20,000, but I have a goal to get there one day. So maybe whenever I do that trip, I would do like a whole 7 and 7 type of thing again, but we'll see. Time will tell.
Amazing. Do you want to stop sharing your screen so we can see?
Yeah, totally forgot that I was sharing my screen.
No worries. Daniel is wondering what company you used for your African tour.
So I saw someone in the chat before mention G Adventures in Africa. I didn't go with G Adventures, but I would, from what I saw, would recommend them because they had buses with Wi-Fi, which was definitely a perk. I went with a I would say very shoestring budget company. It was called Absolute Africa. I still would recommend them. I had a good time, and like they definitely knew like where to take us, and like I felt safe and felt like the guides were knowledgeable for the most part. Definitely was not like my favorite company in the world. Like I wouldn't like emphatically recommend Absolute Africa, but they did plan out an amazing trip, and like felt like it was all good. But some of the times I definitely wished we had more access to like Wi-Fi or like phone chargers and stuff. And obviously that's just me being like a first world person who likes to post things on social media. If you're looking for like a very bare bones trip where you are just like camping and enjoying Africa and like you don't really care if you have great Wi-Fi service, then like sure, then maybe Absolute Africa is a great option for you. I would say also, I'll give them some credit that when the trip got canceled, they handled it pretty well. Like they were able to give us refunds / credits, and they were pretty flexible about like if I wanted to extend my 7-week safari into a 12-week safari, I could have done that midway through the trip. So they did offer some flexibility. Yeah, there's a few companies out there. I would say just do your research, try to find reviews online of like other people who have done it, or like even like stalk people on social media and like DM them and say like, hey, saw you did this trip and you tagged this company, I'm thinking about using them, could I talk to you about it? I had a few people actually do that to me, and like I was happy to chat.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. Okay, Natalie is asking, did you rent a car at all on your trip?
I have never rented a car abroad. I'm a little like, honestly, me personally, I'm just like a little scared of driving in general. Like I've lived in New York City for so many of the past years, like I just like never drive anymore. But I would mostly use like bus type of travel and like group tour type of things to go to places that you would normally rent a car for. And I've never had a problem with that. But obviously renting a car is a good option. I know people in my hostel in Buenos Aires, they rented like a huge van and were like interviewing people in the hostel for like spots in their van to go all the way down to Patagonia. And that could have been probably cheaper and like better than what I ended up doing, was just taking a bus from Buenos Aires to Patagonia. But I personally have a little bit of like trepidation just of my own driving skills renting a car abroad.
Wow, that's adorable. Okay, Marie is asking, how did you handle the language barriers?
Language barriers are definitely a thing. I think I probably in my travels have most experienced language barriers in Southeast Asia. I think for the most part, Europe is pretty like westernized, and you can find people who speak English in the bigger countries. Even like the touristy parts of Africa, like all of our, well, I went with the tour company, like a group tour, so we did have a local guide who was able to overcome those language barriers. Like whenever we did get to a country border in Africa and we were going to like do the manual kind of like visa process, our tour guide was able to kind of like take us through it and like talk to the people running the visa exchange office. And like I'm very confident that I would not have been able to do it as seamlessly if I was there just by myself. But I think one thing I try to keep in mind is like always trying to learn like a little bit of a language when you go to some place is pretty nice to do. Like even if you're just trying to like learn like how to say like hi in their language, thank you in their language, like essential kind of things like where's the bathroom, or like I don't know, like how much does this cost? That can be really good to learn, especially if you want to get more of like the local experiences, like going to the markets and getting to see kind of like what a local really like non-touristy experience looks like. Then you're gonna have to probably learn some language skills to get away from people who speak English and are of that like tourism centric probably class of people in that country. But yeah, I would say going with a local guide overcomes tourist or language barriers, but also just staying in cities, you probably won't have too many issues, I would say. At least I haven't.
Yeah. We had a question about which airlines do you know that encourage layovers? And then we had some people already answer saying Singapore Air, Iceland Air, TAP, and Qatar Airways. Do you have any others off the top of your head?
Singapore Air and Qatar Air are definitely the two that I use that encourage layovers. I'm trying to think. Oh, definitely also, I've flown through Abu Dhabi, I think 2 or 3 times to get to parts of Asia, and they definitely encourage layovers as well. I'm pretty sure Emirates or like anything that flies through Dubai or Abu Dhabi would do something similar. Turkey, I believe, has a similar program. Like I know when I went to Ghana, two of my friends took Turkish Airways, and they were able to like do a whole day trip and like see Sophia, or the Hagia Sophia for a day. Those are the only ones that come to mind that kind of make the most sense. I think anything kind of passing through like the Middle East tends to be a big thing where they'll encourage you to actually get out and see their own country before transporting you to your actual final destination. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And then Natalie was asking, and I'm just going to say, what's your best safety tip for traveling as a woman solo?
I have done a few small trips solo, and I would say I definitely just try to be like more aware of myself when I'm traveling alone. Like I don't walk around the streets with my phone out, whereas I would probably do that if I was in a larger group of friends. I haven't personally done this, but I know like you can often choose rooms in a hostel that are like all girls if that makes you more comfortable rather than like mixed genders. Um, I think for me, having lived in New York City as a young girl by my like walking home by myself at like 3 a.m. every now and then, like it takes a lot to like scare me now when I'm traveling, just because like New York is New York and I feel like comfortable enough there. But overall tips, definitely having a buddy, like having people you know who are going to be tracking your location and like making sure that you're okay and like checking in on you. I think that's also like a really important thing to do if you're traveling alone.
Yeah, I love that tip. That's great. Carla is asking, what are your personal two favorite places that you went on your journey, or out of the 78 countries you've been to?
Yeah. Honestly, I think the trip that I did last year definitely contained like among my top couple of countries. I loved Argentina. Like I think it's one of those countries where you can see everything in one country. Like you have the city of Buenos Aires, you can go to the beach if you want, you can go and see waterfalls up near Brazil, you can go and see Patagonia down in the southern part of Argentina. You can also like have amazing food, you can see like very unique animals. Like I think like kind of like just checks off all the boxes for me. And then Tanzania I found to be like very similar. I think a lot of people forget that Tanzania has this island off the coast of it called Zanzibar, which is like literally a tropical paradise. Like it is beautiful. So it has beaches, it has safaris, you can hike the tallest mountain in Africa in Tanzania. You can see just like such a range of things. I would say like for that reason of being able to like see so much in the span of like a week or 2 weeks of like very diverse landscapes, very diverse things to do, Tanzania and Argentina are definitely at the top of my list. But I think one of the two of the biggest like hidden gem type of countries that I usually recommend in Europe, I loved my experience in Malta. I think like not enough people even know that it's a country. It's like off the coast of Italy in the Mediterranean Sea, and it is beautiful. The water is super blue. There's a really interesting culture and history to it. And that was actually my first solo trip by myself, was to Malta. And I had an amazing time, just kind of like enjoying the nature and talking to some locals on some like guided tours. And then also Laos in Southeast Asia. I had an amazing experience in Laos. Like I hadn't expected anything going there. I was just like, oh, it's one of the last countries I haven't really visited yet in Southeast Asia. Didn't know a lot about it. Ended up going on this amazing cruise down the Mekong River and meeting an amazing woman who was like a self-made entrepreneur, and now she's moved to the US, and I actually just visited her in San Juan Island off the coast of Seattle 2 weeks ago. So it was just like an awesome trip where I had a really good like connection with a local, and also just like it's a beautiful country, amazing food, kind people. So to not go on a tangent, I would say like Argentina, Tanzania, Malta, and Laos are like up there of my favorite countries.
Awesome. We have 3 questions left. Christina is wondering how you got a ticket to the Grammys.
Oh yeah, that was in my Facebook post that I screenshotted. So during my years of college, I studied marketing and global business at NYU, and basically I had originally, like in the first semester of my college experience, was like aiming to go into music business specifically, but then over the years kind of just like changed that interest, but was still involved in this college chapter of the Grammys called Grammy U, where they have like college age students who are interested in music business. You can be like a representative on your campus. So I was a Grammy U rep for, I think like the first 2 years of my college, I was officially in that role. And when it came around to be my senior year, they like let us enter like a basically like first come first serve lottery type of thing to be a seat filler at the Grammys. So I ended up sitting like in between John Legend and Chrissy Teigen, and there's like a photo of me like right behind them, and I look like I'm their child or something. It's like very funny. It was a very cool experience.
Oh my God. I'm stunned. I can't ask the next question. John Legend and Chrissy T. Okay. That's amazing. That's awesome. And I think that just is a very good story of like how you always put yourself out there and seem to like be involved in everything, which is incredible. Okay. And then Kathy, that sort of piggybacks on her question, which is, are you currently working? I know you mentioned this in the beginning of starting something on your own. Can you explain that?
For sure. Yeah. So I graduated in 2020. I graduated early, technically in December of 2019, but I would have been class of 2020. And then I did start a full-time job at Instagram working in product strategy last August, worked there for just under a year and quit in the middle of July, so about a month ago. And I knew I wanted to just like move on to something else, or I would be like challenging myself and like just pursuing more of like what I'm uniquely positioned to do, which I feel like if I have this unique background and interest and passion for travel, I should be focusing all my time on like travel related things. Because realistically, if I think about it, I feel like anyone could learn how to be a product strategist at Instagram, but not everyone could do what I'm doing. So that was kind of like what made me make the shift to like stop doing like kind of like corporate life and like full-time work at a company to just like instead working for myself. And now I've been putting a lot of time into like finalizing my book, kind of like doing the cover designs, finishing copy editing before it comes out in November, as well as trying to focus more on like how can I create content, whether it's like YouTube videos or like short form videos on like Instagram about travel, and like encouraging people to see travel as a tool of personal development is kind of like the mission of my like content creation, I would say. And yeah, I am in the early stages of starting a company for myself and my friends. We are working together to create a company. It's called WOMO, which stands for Word of Mouth Travel Recommendations. And it will be basically a way for people to connect with kind of travel experts who are either from a country or have been to a country, and you can speak one-on-one with them like about what was their experience, what would they recommend, what is kind of like the perfect itinerary from their experience. I know basically like people reach out to me all the time saying like, you've been everywhere, like let me pick your brain, let me help you, or let me get your advice to plan a big trip, or let me get your advice to go to this country that you've been to. If you went there for 7 days but I only have 5 days, how would you do it in a more condensed time period? Like I think there's so many blogs out there that give you a lot of high level information, but not like one-on-one personalized, like tailored to you and your interest type of, I guess, travel guidance. And that's the kind of stuff you can really only get one-on-one. So it's kind of like a modern day, like network of travel experts to replace travel agents, because I feel like they're getting a little antiquated. That's like what I'm hoping to build out in the next year or so.
Incredible. And saving this question for last, Kimberly, because we are a budget travel community, everyone is wondering how you were able to save the 20,000 that you were then using for your trip. So were you working? Was it student loans? Like what, was it a gift?
Yeah, no, really, really valid question. I did work every single semester, every single summer of the entirety of my college career. I would like stack my classes on 3 days a week and work 2 days a week, basically, except for the 2 semesters that I spent abroad fully in Italy and Singapore. I was always working multiple jobs, if not just one. So definitely was just able to prioritize like earning a lot of income at an early age too, with the like explicit purpose of saving it for traveling. And I think also just like being strategic with like money, like I budget a lot and like honestly don't spend a lot of money on things other than food. Like I don't really buy clothing or like things that I don't need, and obviously that's a personal choice. I think, yeah, as a student, I would say like the 2 biggest things I did was like increase my income by doing a lot of jobs, and like decrease my expenses by like not buying things that I don't need, and like always opting to walk or take the subway instead of Uber. Like in New York City, for me, that honestly ended up being a huge, huge difference. Yeah, I would say just like also the fact that I was able to kind of like have it in my head 4 years in advance, like as a freshman, that I wanted to do all this traveling. I like knew that I needed to be setting aside money constantly. So I think just like being in the right mindset was a huge part of the way I was able to fund all of this while being a student, basically.
Yeah. And I think a question that I was sort of waiting for that didn't really come up was, a lot of people usually ask like, do you really think that you're able to see the country if you only go for a day or a week or whatever? And how do you usually respond to that?
Yeah, I think that's a really valid question, because I think the way I think about it is like, okay, if you haven't been somewhere, you're kind of at like 0% knowledge. If you go somewhere for 1 day, you're probably going from like 0 to 50 or 0 to 75, just because you're going from absolutely nothing to like quite a bit of something. And even if you can only go to a country for like a day or a weekend or like a long weekend, I think that's still much more valuable than like waiting around until you have the perfect opportunity to visit every country for exactly the amount of days to like fully experience it. Because if you always wait until you can have like the perfect trip, you just won't get to see a lot of places. Like we have a very finite finite amount of time in our lives. And I think that even just getting a taste of a lot of different places, like kind of for me, at least, the study abroad mentality, or the study abroad kind of like structure of like, you have classes during the week and then you have like 3 to 4 to 5 days, depending on your schedule, to go see a new country. Yes, you're going to be squeezing a lot of stuff in. Yes, you're not going to see absolutely everywhere that you would ideally get to see if you were going on like a one-off, like 1 to 2 week vacation to that specific place. But I think my travel philosophy is that I'd rather get like a taste of many different things to have a better, at least an increased baseline understanding of as many places as possible. Because for me, like, I see travel as a way to kind of learn more about the world, learn more about different people and different ways of life around the world. So if I could potentially one day like visit every country and then have some baseline of understanding of like, I know what the food is like there, I kind of know at least like what it looks like in the main city there that someone from that country has probably been to, it just like lets you be able to relate to people a lot more. And I've actually had that experience where someone was like, oh, I'm from like this country, and I'm like, oh, I've been there, lived in your hometown for a few days, lived on this street, went to this market. Like, it immediately is just a way that you can connect with people. And I think that's the biggest value of travel for me, is like being able to connect more with people through your travel experiences.
It's incredible. Great way to end. Great way to end. I would love to just thank you so much for being here and for sharing your perspective and your knowledge with us today. Also, I would love to I saw a lot of people were here for the first time, and I would love to share where you can find more of our events. It's at thenomadicnetwork.com/events. We have quite a few, I think 4 events this week, and we usually do anywhere from 2 to 6 in a week. We have a few different kinds of events that I would love to highlight. A lot of them look like this. Oops, sorry, my straw. A lot of them look like this, where somebody presents and then there's a Q&A. Some of them are more like, we call them happy hours, where they're much smaller events that are centered around either a geographic location or region of the world you're in. And that's where you meet and mingle with other people that show up. So it's a lot more casual. And then we also have these awesome book club events where we invite authors to come and share about their process for writing the book. And also you as readers of the book get to ask questions. So the next one is next Wednesday. They're always the first Wednesday of every month. Next Wednesday, Mark Adams is coming on to talk about his really famous travel book, Turn Right at Machu Picchu. And then in October, we have Lola coming in, and this is a forthcoming book. I believe it comes out in a week. In Every Mirror, She's Black. And I just dropped those links into the chat. So if you want to sign up for those, go ahead. We would love to have you. And then also, I would love to invite you to join our membership program, Nomadic Map Plus. If you feel like that you got value out of today's presentation, we would love to have you as a part of our deeper community. And you can do that at nomadicmat.com/NM plus. Not only do you get TNN replays of this one, of Caitlyn's last one, of all the ones before and all the ones in the future, you also get access to a lot of cool perks. The one that I will share about right now is we do now monthly giveaways. Again, our membership program is pretty small, and just by virtue of being in it, you're automatically entered in to win our monthly giveaways this month. So if you click on this link now and sign up, you'll be entered to win a free domestic flight round trip. So wherever that is domestic to you, if that's in Europe or if that's in the US or if that, domestic to you. And then of course you get all these other perks that are listed here. And last but not least, I would just like to thank you so much for being a part of our travel community. It's so much fun to see your faces. It's so fun to hear your questions, and very valuable, I feel like, to have you asking all of these incredible questions, because I know other people are having them and potentially not asking them. So it's really great to have over 130 of you on today, listening and participating. And Caitlyn, thank you so much for being here again. If you'd like to say anything before you sign off, now is the time.
Yeah, I mean, not much else to say. I feel like I've talked a lot, but yeah, I'm super happy to connect with anyone. If you want to follow me on Instagram or shoot me an email through my website, feel free, whatever medium is most convenient to you. I love talking to travelers and talking about travel, so don't hesitate to reach out.
Spoken like a true traveler. All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Have a great day.